We're live. The government is shut down, and the Reason Roundtable is live on YouTube today. Will this shutdown make a dent in federal spending? Are mass firings of federal workers on the way? Or is this just a political stunt by Democrats so they can say they're doing something, anything at all, to oppose President Donald Trump? Democrats say this is all about healthcare. But what are they not telling us? And what are Republicans refusing to admit to themselves about the federal budget? We're going to talk about all of this today, and we're going to try to take some questions later on. So please chime in, follow along on YouTube. You can comment, and we will see that. Welcome to a special live edition of the Reason Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by Reason's very own Eric Boehm. Eric covers budgets and economic policy for us, and he is here to talk about shutdown policy and politics. Eric, Democrats, like I said, they're saying this is all about preserving healthcare for Americans, mainly extending the expanded Obamacare subsidies that are set to run out at the end of the year. Those were initially temporary. They were put in place during COVID under Joe Biden. Republicans say they have a clean bill to fund the government for 7 weeks, and Democrats are just stomping their feet to appease donors and activists who want to see Democrats in Congress do something to oppose President Trump. What do you say? What's your take on the shutdown?
We're not here to talk about the baseball playoffs. I thought that was the topic of the discussion. No, I've just switched gears.
If you want to do an hour-long monologue on baseball, I can just sit back, man. No, let's talk about the real news in Washington.
The real contest that's happening right now, the one that actually matters. So they say. Look, I think you summed it up well. I mean, I think those are the stakes of things. And I think, we'll get into the healthcare thing in a second here, but I do think it's interesting to me that the more sane side of the debate is the side that's saying we'll pass a budget for 7 weeks, like as if that makes some sort of sense. And that is to say that, like, even though I'm very critical of the way Republicans have handled being in power recently, I do think they're kind of the ones who are actually got the kind of more sane approach here, although it's a very low bar. Because I do think, I think that the Democrats, I'm not really sure what the strategy is here. And I don't think that, yes, I think there's obviously a desire to obstruct and stop anything you can to show, resistance to the Trump administration or resistance to Republican politics or whatever it is. But I don't think they've done a great job of making the case for how this shutdown, how refusing to go along with just funding the government for 7 weeks or 3 months or whatever we end up with, how that's going to materially combat what Trump is doing. I want to see Congress be more aggressive against some of the Trump agenda, but I'm not sure that this is really the way. And we can get into why that is exactly the healthcare thing. I think the healthcare thing illustrates that point really well.
So I want to talk about the healthcare thing in just a minute, but this is definitely underpants gnome theory of opposing Trump. We need to do something. This is something. Therefore, it will. Well, I don't know what it's going to do because basically everybody expects Democrats to cave eventually. But I want to go back to something that you said here. Republicans are the more sane ones, and it's a low bar. And I don't think you mean you support absolutely everything Republicans are doing here. They're the good guys. I don't think that's what you're saying. But tell me what you mean by sane, because look, we're a libertarian publication, and when the government shuts down, as it does every so often over the last 10, 15 years, when the government shuts down, we always get letters, we get emails, we get tweets from other libertarians who are like, "This is great. Isn't it a good thing that the government is shutting down? If you are skeptical of federal power, if you want a smaller government, isn't this a path to getting that?" So why are the Republicans who want to keep the government open the more sane party here, in your view?
It is kind of funny how it's all flipped around, right? That because typically you think of Republicans as being the ones that want to obstruct and want to shut things down and want to stop the gears of government from turning or whatever they hope to accomplish. They've been the ones who have driven a lot of these shutdowns recently. And now it's kind of the other way around. The Republicans want to keep the government open because they're in power, obviously. And it's the Democrats that are shutting it down. Yeah. I mean, look, I get the emotional argument from a pure id perspective, right? Of yes, the government is shut down. Wonderful. Now I don't know, your income taxes don't get collected anymore and all drugs are legal. That would be wonderful, but that's not actually what happens, right? Like the
we
government
suddenly didn't achieve libertopia is the thing here. And one thing that people need to understand is something like 80% of the government stays funded and stays operational.
95% of HHS employees are exempted from being shut down. That's the biggest part of the government is HHS, right? And so it's like it's a slowdown. It's a limited shutdown. I drove in today from where I live out like an hour or so outside the city, and traffic was terrible. Like I thought I was going to fly right in this morning. Nope. So it's like the government isn't shut down. Washington, D.C.
Well, they're all coming in. They're all coming in for the cocktail specials.
Maybe
this is, I understand, is how we know the government's shutting down.
Yeah.
Is that all the bars in D.C. are having government shutdown specials? There's a continuing rye solution, like a continuing resolution, at least one bar here in D.C.
We should have had some of those for the live stream. Why didn't we?
That's what we should have had.
Come on,
all right,
to engage seriously with that point, just real quick, is that like, I mean, right, what libertarians should want, and I think what people, I don't want to speak for all libertarians, it's impossible to do that, but what I want as a libertarian is I want a smaller, more efficient, more effective government. I want a government that does less but does the things it does very well, and a government shutdown doesn't get you there, right? A government shutdown just makes it harder for people to engage with the government when and if they must, which is an unfortunate reality of everybody's life. And it doesn't actually get us. If we look at the recent history, at least, of government shutdowns, it's not as if we've come out of them and suddenly we spend less money or suddenly our tax dollars are better spent. Like those outcomes just haven't happened. And we've done this enough recently that if that was the case, we would have some empirical evidence of it. And I just don't see it.
I covered Obamacare and I covered the shutdown over Obamacare in 2013. And so one of the things, just to go back to what have shutdowns gotten us, in, I want to say it was October of 2013, the Obamacare exchanges went live and the government shut down. And the government shut down over Obamacare. Republicans were the ones who were blockading government funding, and they were saying, "Well, it's about healthcare, right?" Kind of almost an inverse of the situation we have right now. They were trying to stop Obamacare, and they said, "Look, the public is on our side. Obamacare is unpopular." And they were right in certain ways. There were polls showing that that the public was broadly, a majority of the public was against the Affordable Care Act. But what ended up happening was that the public turned against the Republicans who were shutting down the government. And the public kind of overlooked at that time the fact that when the Obamacare exchanges went online, they were a total disaster. So what happened was they actually made Obamacare more popular. They blew up their own cause here. And so I think that's a good probably transition to talking about what Democrats are doing now with Obamacare, once again, with the expanded Obamacare subsidies that were put in place during COVID. So this is about $40 billion a year in additional federal healthcare spending. And it was initially passed as a pandemic emergency spending measure, justified by the idea, well, it's a pandemic. It's a healthcare emergency. But it was pretty clear from the start that Democrats wanted these supposedly temporary subsidies to be permanent and to just sort of be in place forever. They were designed to fix Obamacare because Obamacare, as passed, was not affordable. The law is literally called the Affordable Care Act. And the one thing that was didn't work about that law, many things didn't work, but the biggest, clearest thing that didn't work about Obamacare was in its initial form, insurance was still not affordable. And so Democrats were like, well, we need $40 billion a year or so extra to fix this. If you tacked that on to the initial bill, that initial bill was like $940 billion, give or take. That was the CBO score for it. There were already a whole bunch of gimmicks to get it there. But if you tacked on an initial $400 billion to that initial score, that would have been a $1.3 trillion or so bill over 10 years. And that wouldn't have passed at all. And so this is, just the existence of these expanded subsidies, I think really shows the kind of cheats that were used to put Obamacare in place, where they passed a law understanding that it wouldn't even work on its own terms. It wouldn't do the things that they said it would do. And then they were going to have to spend a huge amount of additional money after that in order to make it work at all. And now we're at this point where it's like, well, we're going to fight you if you don't keep this $400 billion of additional spending in place. Do you think that Democrats are going to win this argument?
No, I don't think so, because I think they will ultimately cave on this, and that really has nothing to do with the healthcare thing at all, actually. That just has to do with the fact that, like, Democratic special interests are the interests that are more likely to be hurt by a government shutdown, I think, is kind of my calculation on this. And the fact that we've already had 3 or 2 Democrats have already jumped to the Republican side, plus Angus King, who's a independent technically, but he's effectively a Democratic caucus with Democrats. So I feel like they're going to be the ones that cave on this. But I think on the healthcare thing, I think it's worth just kind of deconstructing the Democratic talking point on this a little bit, because it's illustrative of a point that I like to make a lot, is just like how much of the federal government's like welfare goes to wealthier Americans, because that's really what we're talking about here. And I think that gets lost. I think a lot of the Republicans are trying to take away people's health care. Republicans are going to are forcing premiums to rise, and people are going to pay more bills. All these talking points that Democrats are using on this give you this impression that Republicans are trying to take away subsidies that are making it possible for like low income or working class or struggling Americans to pay for healthcare. And that's just like fundamentally not true when you look at the numbers. So the important thing that you mentioned there, Peter, is that during the pandemic, the American Rescue Plan did this expanded Obamacare subsidies, right? And what it did is it just eliminated the cap that existed, right? There was a cap at 400% of the federal poverty level. People above that level couldn't qualify for those subsidies. Now you can. And cap went away.
Just to be clear, 400% of the federal poverty level. Yes, we're talking about the poverty level, but 400% of the poverty level for a family of 4 gets you to a little over $100,000 a year in income.
Yeah.
Yes, you can say that in some cases somebody like that might have financial struggles, but this is not, the deeply poor in America.
That's exactly right. Let's just put a nice little baseline here for people to use. I know numbers in a conversation are difficult sometimes, but median household income in the United States, that's what I always like to default to. Median household income in the United States is right around $83,000. That's what it was last year. It's probably a little higher than that now. 83,000. If you're above that line as a household, you're in the upper 50% of households in the United States, right? And then what you just said, Peter, 400% of the federal poverty line right now for a family of 4 gets you to about $130,000. So if you rolled back the expanded subsidies and you went back to that $400,000 level, everybody who earns up to a family of 4 that makes $130,000 a year still gets the subsidies. The people we're talking about, whether they get subsidies or not, are the people above that level, whether that cap should exist or not. And so really what this debate is about is whether the federal government, whether taxpayers, and whether it's really future taxpayers, because we're just borrowing money at this point. It's not even real tax money that we're using to pay for this stuff. It's borrowing. Whether we should borrow more heavily to subsidize a purchase by households that are making well into 6 figures. And that seems crazy to me. Like, I understand health insurance is really important, and I understand that it's also really expensive. But if you make $130,000 or $200,000 a year, I don't know, find space in your budget for that. Cut something else, because healthcare is really important. I don't see the federal government as having a role in paying for that at all. And it's like Republicans have done a poor job, I think, of countering this talking point from the Democrats.
Well, the Republican line on this is just money for illegals to get health care, which is mostly not true.
Right.
And that has been their argument is it's just about the illegals, and they've barely made any other arguments. They have talked about one other thing, though. You see this from Republican leadership in Congress. They've talked about these subsidies being rife with fraud, which is true. But this is my worry. My worry is that Republicans they've been signaling for the past actually couple of weeks, but even in the past couple of days. My worry is that Republicans are going to sign on to extending these subsidies, and they're going to become effectively permanent, even if it's another temporary extension. Because if they don't go away now, they're here forever. And that they're just going to say, well, we fixed the fraud problem, and that will maybe, this will cut some amount of spending here. There's not going to be any more fraud in this. But then we will have these uncapped subsidies that end up going to families making well into 6 figures, as you said.
Yeah,
I mean, you said that like Democrats might fold, but my concern here is Republicans might fold as well.
Yeah, I think that's possible too. And I think there's also, I mean, I don't know which way this is going to go, and making predictions about it is kind of silly, but I think it also illustrates the way in which we do so much of it's not even really fair to call it budgeting, but it's the way in which we do budgeting these days is that we do these temporary extensions of temporary programs, and then we extend them again next year and extend them again next year. We were just talking about this a few weeks ago on the podcast, right? About some of the stuff in the big, beautiful bill. I guess it was a few months ago now, time flies, but, and about how there's some temporary elements in that the Republicans passed back in the spring, and how that's going to just roll, 4 years from now, they're just going to have to come back and they're assuming that they'll just, renew it for 4 more years. We need to have like the bottom line of all of this stuff, of everything surrounding the discussion about the government shutdown, is that we need to have like an actual federal budget. Congress needs to actually pass a budget.
Imagine that.
It always comes back to this, but like, yes, that's what you need is a 10-year budget that you pass and that you update every year. And this is a mess.
And we just don't have it. So to go back to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, since you mentioned that's the other part of the Democrats' healthcare demands. And they have talked about this less, but I gather they did release an alternative continuing resolution, not a resolution, a resolution. Their alternative plan would have rolled back the $1 trillion or so in Medicaid spending reductions that were part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act over the summer. And so they're not just asking, at least in theory, they are not just asking to continue these Obamacare subsidies for families earning well into 6 figures. They're also, at least in theory, asking for the rollback of $1 trillion in spending reductions, which means we're talking about, close to $1.5 trillion in additional spending is their kind of nominal big picture demand here. I actually, just to be clear, I don't think that rolling back the Medicaid cuts, the Medicaid spending reductions here is likely to happen as part of this budget negotiation, maybe somewhere off in the future. I don't think that this is what they're talking about. And I think this just goes to your point about the total lack of fiscal responsibility from either party. And Democrats are kind of explicit about it. Like they're just like, yeah, $1 trillion, another $1 trillion, another, right, billions and billions here. Like they don't even pretend to care anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that's mostly a negotiating tactic. That feels like something you ask for that you then know you can discard later as part of your negotiating. I have no inside information about that, but that's just sort of the way it feels to me. I think it also goes back to something you said at the beginning about like there's this desire from the donor base for sure, but also from just anybody left of center in America right now to see like active resistance on the part of Congress to the Trump administration. It's like I wish the demands were different, right? I wish the demands were like defunding ICE or defunding some of the other aggressive, more authoritarian things that the Trump administration has tried to do in terms of, whether it's immigration enforcement or whether it's, negotiating over tariffs or something like that, right? I wish those were the things that the Democrats were fighting over here rather than like, should we continue to give healthcare subsidies to people making 6 figures? That's not the sort of, maybe I am admittedly not a Democratic donor or a Democratic voter, but like if I was, I think I would want to see actual pushback on those types of policies rather than this. But it's all healthcare all the time. I guess they think it sounds good in sound bites. I don't know.
It is their best issue in polls, and there's an argument to be made here that they can push that they might be effective in pushing Republicans to accede to their demands, not on I think the Medicaid reductions rollback, but on the Obamacare stuff. You've got Vice President J.D. Vance on Fox News today saying, "I am prepared to go to the Capitol right now to talk to Democrats about premium support for the Affordable Care Act." So that's the Obamacare subsidies. He says, basically, I will do that if and when they vote to keep the government open. So he's not making this part of the negotiation to reopen the government, but he's absolutely leaving on the table the possibility that Republicans might vote to keep these subsidies in place, at least for another year or two. But I want to talk just actually a little bit more about the Republicans here and sort of how they're proceeding, what their strategy is, what they're saying, right? Because part of what is happening here is that Republicans are promising that this is going to be a path toward a smaller government, towards reducing the bureaucracy, if nothing else, but maybe towards cutting a bunch of programs. So President Trump has said that he might use the shutdown to, as the New York Times describes it, enact measures that would be bad for Democrats, like, quote, cutting vast numbers of people out, cutting things that they like, cutting programs that they like. Trump added, a lot of good can come from shutdowns. So, do you think that any good is going to come from this shutdown? And do you think that anything meaningful is going to be cut? I mean, you got OMB director Russ Vought saying, who he's been saying this for days, if not weeks now, saying that maybe by the end of the week, mass layoffs of the federal workforce might be coming.
Yeah, I think it's funny to just like imagine the White House having a book of like policies that Democrats like and policies that Republicans like, and they must have somehow done some polling or something to figure out what goes on what side of that. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't. Again, we talked about this earlier. I don't see any sort of anything in the track record of government shutdowns that suggests to me there's going to be meaningful cutbacks in terms of spending. There are some things that the executive branch can do internal to itself, and these fights have been going on now for months over laying off, furloughing employees. Then they get told by courts they got to bring some of them back, or they say, oops, we fired too many people, we got to bring some of them back. That's happened a few times too. I expect that will continue whether there's a government shutdown or not. Maybe this gives them an opportunity to pull some other legal measures out that let them lay people off. But this has been the same debate we've been having since the Doge episodes back in the early part of the year. And it's that, the way you actually cut back, I hate to sound like a broken record on this, but the way you actually cut back the size of government is to have Congress pass a budget that spends less money. Like, that's how you get there. And the executive branch laying off people or firing people, yes, maybe on the margins reduces, it certainly could reduce the size of government. Maybe it reduces the costs, but it also creates more burdens for people that still have to interact with the government. If you have to go get your passport renewed, or you have to go fix something in your social security file or whatever it may be, and now you have to wait in line twice as long because there aren't as many people that are certain like that, there are other costs that come with that too. I want to see the government do less things. I want to see the government be less expensive. I want to see the government borrow less money, and I want to see the debt go down. I want to see all those things happen, but I just don't believe that this is the way you get there. And I hope they prove me wrong. I hope I'm wrong about this. But I'll believe it when I see it, and not until then.
So, are the liberals who are scared that the Trump administration is going to use this to cut a whole bunch of stuff, to fire a whole bunch of federal workers, are they wrong? I mean, I'm looking at a subhead for a multi-byline piece in the Atlantic, right, that just says the Trump administration might use a shutdown to finish the job that Doge started. Do you think that is not going to happen? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I don't know what will happen with that, but I don't think that will materially change the fiscal condition of the United States, which is the thing that we should actually care about, right? Whether a certain government employee or a certain set of government employees have jobs tomorrow or next week or next year is something that doesn't concern me, really. It's how much money are we spending? How much money are we borrowing every year? I want to see that number change. And I don't think you can really make much of an impact on that number by laying off scores of federal employees. You only make a change to that number by actually passing a budget through Congress.
Yeah, there was apparently a call with House Republicans and OMB Director Russ Vought. And again, Vought is the sort of budget mastermind within the Trump administration who has called for doing things that make the bureaucracy, like the bureaucrats and the federal workers, he wants to traumatize them. I butchering that quote just a little bit, but like that's very nearly what he said, according to ProPublica, right? This is somebody who's really talked about how the Trump administration's goals just have to be to kind of bring the bureaucracy to heel. And he's the one who has been saying, well, we're going to draw up plans for mass firings, and maybe we'll have mass firings within the next couple of days. But apparently on this private call with House Republicans, the reporting is that he didn't provide actually many details of what's going to happen or how they're going to go about this. There was a person who told who was on that call who told a reporter he was surprisingly vague on everything. And it just sounds to me like they have been talking a big game, but they didn't really have plans for what they were going to do here when the government shut down.
Yeah, and I should also mention here that like already on Tuesday, which was that yesterday, before the shutdown even happened, two of the big government unions filed a lawsuit, like a preemptive lawsuit, I guess, already trying to stop any kind of what was this? They argued that the OMB had taken a legally unsupportable position to use a lapse in appropriations as grounds for eliminating programs and jobs that are not considered current priorities. And so they were responding to some guidance that OMB had put out last week with that. But like this is going to all be just tied up in court. It's going to be the same story as the Doge stuff, which was like big flashy news stories about, hey, we fired X number of people or we closed X number of programs. And then like by the time you get done going through the legalese of it all, most of those people get their jobs back, or it turns out that the numbers that we claimed we were saving by closing this agency or that program were only half as much as what we initially thought. Like this is just trimming around the edges, and that's fine, sure, right? Like this is hardly the thing to get the most upset about from a libertarian perspective for what the Trump administration is doing. I do appreciate some of these efforts to get rid of some of the chaff here, but this is not materially changing the fiscal condition of the United States. And I think if you take these sorts of budgetary issues seriously, as you and I do, and as most of the people listening, I assume, do, or they wouldn't be here, then you want to see actual substantial progress made here. And you've got Republicans that control all three branches of government right now, which is an opportunity to actually move the ball forward on some of these big budgetary issues or entitlement issues or what have you. And I know it's a slim majority in Congress. It's very difficult to get anything done, but like that's where the fight needs to be had. And this is all, I think this is, I don't want to say it's a distraction because that's not true. It accomplishes something, but it doesn't accomplish enough.
Okay, so on the Russ vote, on terms of what he's doing, he has said that he is reviewing infrastructure funding for New York. And there's some reports that say he's already frozen $18 billion in New York infrastructure spending. Of course, it's where Chuck Schumer's from. Right? This is okay. That's $18 billion. Maybe it actually stays frozen. Probably it ends up being unfrozen at some point, right? Just like the cavemen. But this just strikes me as really telling. On the one hand, he's promising these big sweeping cuts, and sure, $18 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And we could probably say, well, there's better ways of funding stuff in New York than just having the federal government send tens of billions of dollars down there. And I'm not like per se against these cuts, but these end up being selective and politically targeted and quite likely to be rolled back because of that. And it just ends up not being a kind of systematic and thoughtful effort to reform or the government or shrink it. And so what you end up getting is this sort of high profile political standoff in which each side says it's the other side's fault and then doesn't want to back down, but nothing really happens in the end. How do we break out of this? Because this just feels like this is all that politics is these days.
Yeah. It's almost like letting one person and his friend Russ Voigt control what
Russ Vogt, rock the vote.
Sorry, letting him control what spending happens is a subpar solution. And really what we probably should do is have, like, let's say a few hundred people get together and they can have committees and they can draw up documents for different parts of the government that specify how much money those departments would get. And then they can look at how much money is coming in, and then they can decide, and then they could vote on this. And maybe those hundreds of people would actually be elected by all of us too. So we'd all feel like we had a little bit of say in the process.
Everybody could have a representative.
Yeah, that would be nice.
30 or
and
so.
Then we could abide by that. And that seems like that would be the way to decide what money gets spent where. And that would be better probably than just letting one guy decide who to politically target with spending. I think there's an interesting element to this though, that is aside from all the fiscal things, and we could sit here and just say pass a budget all day, and that would be true. But there's the political side of it, the like actual campaign election politics side of it, right? Is this thing that Republicans keep talking about, how Chuck Schumer's just worried that he's going to get primaried by AOC. And I do think there's actually maybe some truth to that concern. And the fact that whether that's true or not, I guess the more interesting thing is something that Nate Silver tweeted out, I think this was yesterday, is just like when you look at the approval ratings of like Chuck Schumer, for example, he's like deep deep underwater in his approval rating, right? Like negative 26%. Republican leaders in Congress are also very deep underwater. So like, even though Donald Trump is unpopular and even though JD Vance is unpopular, they are relatively far more popular than the leaders in Congress, and particularly the Democratic leaders in Congress, who are the kind of the people that they're up against in this fight, right? And that's an element of this too. I don't know, that doesn't enter into the the fiscal discussion of it at all, but the fact that like Americans don't like Chuck Schumer kind of hurts the Democrats' negotiating position just as at a baseline on all of this stuff. And whether whatever that means for his political future, I'm not exactly sure. But it's, I don't know. That's an element of this that I think those of us that think about this as on the fiscal side of things and on the policy side of things maybe undervalue sometimes, is just the like pure likability of the people involved, which is low across the board, but is a particular problem, I think, for Democrats right now. Yeah.
The raw political incentives here
Yeah.
are very clearly part of the story. I mean, you had Democrats go along with a plan to fund the government earlier this year. I think it was in March, right? And there was some talk at that point about whether or not they should allow a shutdown to happen, whether they should basically go along with the Republicans' plan or not. And if they don't, have a shutdown and have a showdown over it. And at that point, Schumer was like, we're not going to get anything from this.
Yeah.
This will not help us at all. So they went along with it. And Democrats, and in particular Democratic activists, donors, the kind of the base, the loudest voices in the Democratic Party and in its orbit, are very mad right now, and they want to see something done. And this is just the thing that I keep going back to, is this is entirely an effort to appease that base that wants to see something done. And it's very unlikely to actually pay off in delivering any real results for Democrats, but also for those who, for those of us libertarians who would like to see, hey, a shrunken government, like a more efficient government, one that works better, one that has, that is not so bloated. I don't think we're going to get that either. So who is going to win out of this? Is there anybody who comes out ahead from a shutdown like this? Does this serve any useful goal?
No, probably not. I will say, look, I wouldn't want to be Chuck Schumer on any day. Like, dear God, do not let me wake up. I'm
so glad you're not Chuck Schumer.
In a bad spot. Yeah, I am too. I think he's in a bad spot here, because I think you laid it out pretty well right there. Is that like, you've got on one hand, I think he probably knows, or at least the people around him know, that like this is probably not going to work. Democrats are ultimately going to cave on this, I think, in a few days or a week or something, right? It's not clear what they're going to get out of this. It's not even really clear that they're fighting for the right things. All the stuff we've talked about already. I don't know that there's a lot to be gained. But then on the other hand, you have the political angle, which is to say that if you just do what he did in March, if you just go along and say we're not going to have the fight, then you're going to have, if it's not actually AOC, it's other people like AOC, it's that wing of the party saying, look at these guys who are just they're just collaborating with the Trump administration. They're keeping the government open when they didn't need to. And that creates an opening on his, I guess it's on his left, within his party, however you want to phrase that, and that's something that he's got to be aware of and cognizant of. And so tactically, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be in the situation that he's in. I wouldn't want to be in the situation that Democrats are in right now. I think it is an interesting inversion of some of those like Tea Party era shutdowns that you were talking about earlier from 2013. There was another one right after that, right in 2015, something like that. And it was in those situations, it was Republicans who were driving the shutdown, and then were, I think, by and large, getting blamed for it by the public, even though that never really seemed to hurt them too much.
I mean, the sort of political science polling on this is pretty clear that at least for the last decade or so, 10, 15 years, the party that is perceived to be pursuing an unrelated agenda to the budget process, who blocks the government from staying open for an unrelated cause, ends up being the party that is blamed. And so when Republicans shut down the government over the Affordable Care Act in 2013, Republicans were blamed. And in this case, this is what Democrats are are doing, like they're saying, where it's about the healthcare subsidies, right? The Obamacare subsidies, the maybe it's about the Medicaid rollback in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? And so this is why people have looked at this and said Democrats are playing a really weak hand here because they're asking for something. Yes, healthcare is their best issue, but they're asking for something that is unrelated, that Republicans are even saying, we'll talk, we'll negotiate, but we got to keep the government open. And the public doesn't like that.
I think that's right. And I just saw right before we came on here, I was watching JD Vance's little like 4 or 5 minute blistering rant in the White House press room earlier today. And it was giving me like flashbacks to Obama in those years of when things were reversed. He was saying, hey, we got to keep the government open. We got to pay
accusing them of hostage taking, which is almost like a verbatim messaging line from the Obama administration.
It's hurricane season. We got to make sure we're prepared for that. He mentioned, all of these things and it's just really funny how that has just completely inverted. I'm not one of those people that believes that like the two parties are exactly the same all the time. Although I think some libertarians kind of hold that view, but this is one of those situations where it's like, yeah, the party in power just acts like the party in power, and the kind of the R's and D's are interchangeable.
Yeah. So let's go to a question here from John Stanley on X, who asks, without the stick of monetary penalties toward the non-insured, is there any world in which Obamacare is not a huge expense? Right. So just to go back here, we did have at one point when Obamacare was passed, when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, it initially included a penalty for remaining uninsured. This was what was called the individual mandate. In theory, in some technical way, the mandate is still on the books, right? It was challenged in the courts, right? And courts said it was legal because it was a tax and not a requirement, not a command to do something, right? And so the way that it worked was, if you didn't have health insurance, you had to pay a penalty on your taxes. So what Republicans did was, during the first Trump term, they zeroed out the penalty. So there's still a penalty if you don't have health insurance, but now the penalty is zero. So there's not really a penalty.
Yeah, you still have to file that extra form every year when you do your taxes. You still have to file that form, even though it's like, why? I don't know why I'm filing this form. But that's...
But let's go to the question.
Yeah,
let's answer the question here. Without the mandate, without the penalty, is there any world in which Obamacare is not a huge expense?
I don't know that you even need the first clause, right? Like, there's not
right.
a world in which Obamacare was not a huge expense, period. But yeah, I think I don't know. This is really more of your area of expertise, Peter. Honestly, but my impulse would be to say that provision, correctly hated though it was, and it was that like crazy mystery box of like, oh well, it's not a tax, and then we get to the Supreme Court and we open the box, it's like, oh, it's a tax. That whole thing was ridiculous and stupid. I think it's most of it, but it's a bad policy. But I guess, like, yes, if you're going to insure people, if you're going to require, like, if you're going to have the government pay such a huge share of health insurance, I don't know, there's got to be some way to force people to participate. I don't. Yeah.
Well, so what I would say is, in fact, the penalty was relatively weak, and just in terms of as a coercive tool, there wasn't a huge amount of evidence that was doing a huge amount to shift behavior. I don't want to say that the effect was zero, but it wasn't gigantic. And in fact, the appeal, the lure, the carrot, right? So you think of the penalty, the mandate tax as the stick. The carrots were the subsidies, and the subsidies did in fact pull people in, and expanding the subsidies pulled in more people. But of course, the subsidies are what make this expensive. And so to answer your question, John, like Eric said, you don't even need the first part. Obamacare is expensive because of the subsidies. As long as those subsidies are in place, Obamacare will be expensive. That's true even if the expanded subsidies are allowed to expire. Obamacare is still going to cost a couple $100 billion a year, even without that. This just adds an additional $40 billion on top of that. And so the fight over here is, or at least nominally, to the extent there is a policy fight in healthcare, The fight is over whether Obamacare is going to be expensive or even more expensive, whether it's going to have subsidies that go up to about $130,000 a year, or whether it's going to have, I should say, whether it's going to have subsidies that go to families making up to about $130,000 a year, or whether it's going to have subsidies that go to families making considerably more than that. And to me, it just seems like in terms of, with the kind of budget we have, with the kind of debt and deficits we have, this is a no-brainer. Don't spend an extra $40 billion a year on healthcare subsidies that are rife with fraud, that go to families making well into six figures. And this is the other thing. There's a Wall Street Journal editorial on this that's actually pretty good. They went into a BLS report that noted, and they basically pulled out of this. If you look at what's going on in the health insurance marketplaces right now, and with health insurance, a lot of people are getting health insurance from Obamacare who could be getting health insurance from their employer. So some of these people might, yes, lose subsidies because if Republicans, if these don't get, if the expanded subsidies don't get pulled back. However, many of those people could still end up with, could still get health insurance through their employers, and are just choosing not to right now because of the way the Obamacare subsidies are structured. It's ruled that they're kind of not supposed to be doing that, but the rule is basically not enforced here. And so these kind of predictions Democrats are making of, there's going to be a healthcare apocalypse. That's not what we're going to see. I just don't think that's where we're going to end up. If these subsidies roll back, we're going to go back to the way Obamacare was before the subsidies got expanded, from 2013 until 2020 or so.
To that same point, I think that the right way to look at this, I think, is that it's not so much that we need penalties to make people make better choices with their healthcare or their healthcare dollars or their spending. It's that what we need is prices, right? It's not a penalty, but you need prices. And what you will see if the subsidies go away for that group, again, we're only talking about people above that 400% of the federal poverty line threshold that we're even talking about here. But you will see premiums go up for those people. And I feel bad. I do feel bad if that makes it difficult for people to make ends meet next year or whatever. But having a little bit more of an actual price signal, and it's still not a real price signal because healthcare is so incredibly diluted in terms of the way prices work, but having something of a price signal there will actually trigger changes, not just in the marketplace. I think it will make people change maybe their own decisions about what healthcare policies they do. Maybe they'll do, as you were saying, Peter, look for policies through their employer instead of going on the exchanges. I don't know what, but I know the market will shift if premiums go up and that happens. But the other thing it might do is it might actually inspire some anger to change the way the system is currently set up for healthcare in the first place, right? Like the way in which health insurance works in the first place, which should be changed. We shouldn't still have, this is a whole other discussion for another day, but we shouldn't still have employer-based healthcare really to begin with. We should do other things to make healthcare more affordable. We should allow people to buy plans that are currently illegal because Obamacare decided they were subpar or whatever. There's other ways to change the prices and the discussion over what health insurance costs. And I instead of just saying, well, we should punish people or we should penalize people for not buying it.
The healthcare system is a mess. The budget's a mess. The policy around all of this is a mess. It doesn't really seem like anybody in Congress is actually doing anything to make it better. It's just a bunch of political stunts. That's how we ended up in this situation that we're in right now. So I've got another question here from Power Hunger, who asks, are shutdowns good for libertarian recruiting, even if it doesn't directly further libertarian causes? A lot of people will look around and say, the government shut down, and nothing happened. Nothing, right? And part of my answer to that is just, in some ways, that's true that nothing happens because 80% or so of the government stays online because it's funded on autopilot. But then there's, how do you answer this question? Do you think that shutdowns are good for libertarian recruiting because it demonstrates that we didn't need the federal government? What was it doing anyway?
I want that to be true. I hope that's true on some level. I hope people look at this and realize that. But I also worry that, like, whenever we have these moments, these like news cycles where it's us versus them kind of politics, that really just helps the two side, right? It just like further entrenches the tribalism that already dominates so much of our system. And I think it just becomes more of a, you want to take healthcare away from people and you guys don't want the troops to get paid. And that's not usually good for libertarian outcomes. Maybe on the margins, maybe some people look at that and just say, well, the hell with this. I need to find a different way of understanding politics or a different way of approaching politics. And to those people, we welcome you. But I think these big fights, big federal policy fights tend to just make people retreat to their own camps and circle the wagons. And that's not always good for us. In fact, that's basically never good for us.
There's some really interesting research that suggests that when government is dysfunctional or seen to be dysfunctional, understood to be not working for people, paradoxically, demand for bigger government increases. And so you see this pretty straightforwardly in, kind of authoritarian countries that have kind of descended into dysfunction. And then you end up with some sort of authoritarian leader who's like, I'm the one who's going to solve this by taking power. And you're seeing, frankly, I don't think we've sort of descended into full, dictatorial autocracy here, but you see this at least at the margins in little ways here with Trump. And it is, in fact, quite worrying. And so this is something that I always try to stress to libertarians when I talk to them. They're like, hey, the government doesn't work. Okay, agree in a bunch of ways. Isn't it okay and even good when it's seen to be not working? My answer is, look, I wish I could agree with you. I wish I thought you were right here, but I actually think that as libertarians, what we should want is a pretty effective government that is functional, that works well at the small number of things that it tries to do. When it tries to do something, it should do those things well, and then it should just not do a whole bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. No, I have nothing to add. That's exactly right. I said earlier that I think what we want out of the budget is a smaller federal budget, and we want a more efficient and effective government. And that's we're not going to get that from a shutdown, unfortunately.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left here before we have to go. If you have additional questions, you can let us know. But Eric, take us out here. How does this end? Where are we going with this? Ooh. How long do you think the shutdown is going to last? And what do you think the end game is?
We make predictions here. I think the fact that I think I mentioned it earlier, but there were a couple of Democrats yesterday that voted for the continuing resolution. So John Fetterman had voted for it previously. And then there are two more, Catherine Cortez Masto and Angus King, again, not technically a Democrat, but he caucuses with the Democrats, the independent from Maine, who voted for it. So that's three. I think you got to get to, 7 or 8? Rand Paul is on the other side. He's gone the other way. He's a no at the moment, but he probably comes back over at some point. If this gets close, I don't know. I don't want to speak for him actually on that. I'm not sure what he's thinking on this. And so I guess looking at those numbers and looking at the fact that there's already been some erosion and looking at some of the stuff we talked about earlier about the sort of the difficult situation that Democrats find themselves in at the moment, and that Chuck Schumer specifically finds himself in, I think it's more likely to me that the Democrats break on this. But man, I don't know if you made me make a prediction or sometime next week, maybe. I don't think this goes on for very long. I hate to make the vibes based assessment of this, but it's like, that's kind of what I'm doing here, is that I just don't get the sense from anybody that I talk to about this, that this is like where everybody's locked in for the long term. This is serious. It feels almost like just a pro forma kind of thing. And I don't know. I think it'll be a week.
I think that's about right. We've got another question here. This is a little bit technical, a little bit nerdy, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This question comes from Ed, who asks if Medicare or TRICARE, which is the military health insurance program, setting the base price of medical services at 10x the cost is the problem, which inherently warps costs. Is abolishing insurance as a protection racket the best solution? Should we abolish insurance, Eric, because Medicare is screwing up the price mechanism?
I would love to see a state try this, right? This is one of those laboratory of democracy things. We don't need to solve all these problems at the federal level. Let's let Rhode Island take a swing at that and see how it goes, and then see what happens. I've covered this on that.
On the other hand, that's how we got Obamacare in the first place. They basically were like, let's let Massachusetts do it, and then.
And it didn't work, but we'll try it everywhere else and maybe it'll work. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think there does need to be like a massive rethink of the way health insurance specifically works in this country. And there also needs to be like a greater awareness on the part of the general public that and politicians that health insurance and health care are really two different things, right? Like that we should have learned that by now. It's been 15 years since Obamacare, where all the focus was on this is Michael Cannon's point at Cato. He talks about this every time I talk to him, is that it's like, giving people health insurance is not the same thing as giving people health care. And that is a disconnect that I think is becoming increasingly apparent to anybody who has to engage with the healthcare system at any point in time. And so, yeah, I don't know. There needs to be a real radical overhaul. I don't know if like abolishing health insurance is really the right thing. I prefer to allow private businesses to offer services to people that want to pay for their services. And if you want to buy insurance, you should, be welcome to do it. I don't think we should make it illegal. But there are certainly things that could be done to make it easier and more cost effective and encourage people to pay for healthcare out of pocket. Certainly things like HSAs and that sort of stuff has moved us a little bit in that direction, but you could do more of those things. Just, any sort of like structural incentive to get away. The big thing, and this is a super wonky thing, but the big thing is you should just like get rid of the tax exemption for health insurance, right? The employer tax exemption. You basically get free money because your employer pays for your health insurance. You don't get it, but like that's a form of compensation that's not taxed. And if you got rid of that tax exemption, that would change the incentives that employers have to offer health insurance, and that would change the way the market for health insurance works. This is again a much like longer, wonkier discussion, but that's the big change that I would love to see happen.
And you'd need to pair that with major reforms to Medicare, at least. Major reforms, if not major cutbacks, right? The way I would answer this question is we don't need to abolish insurance. What we need to do in the healthcare industry, in the healthcare sector, is to let insurance act like insurance. Because right now, people treat insurance in healthcare insurance primarily as prepaid medical care. They want to think of it as something like a guarantee of medical care, and that has forced systems, often for regulatory reasons, right? Because people think of it this way, because the law is often structured this way. People think of health insurance, like you said, as healthcare. They think of these things as indistinguishable. Insurance is actually great. But what insurance is good at doing is offsetting, is mitigating really, really unusual risks, right? So when something big, something expensive, something unusual happens, that's when you need insurance. You think about this with your car. You probably have car insurance, and you don't turn in your car insurance every time you go get your oil changed. Like that, you just pay cash for that. The car insurance is there for when you get into a serious wreck, when something really big happens. But that's not how it works in medical insurance. In the healthcare world, the insurance is part of nearly everything. Nearly, I say, because there are a couple of places, you have surgery centers like this place in Oklahoma that we've covered a couple of times. You have like LASIK. There are some procedures, some industries, some clinics that are kind of outside the insurance realm. And what you see in those settings is that healthcare ends up having prices, and then people can make decisions about what they're going to do with their own money. And again, they can have. This is sort of this is a little bit far afield here, but you can have insurance actually act like insurance through catastrophic care programs, and especially for middle class people, for people making well into six figures, which is what we're talking about with these expanded Obamacare subsidies here. Folks like that have money where they can pay for routine expenses themselves. Like that shouldn't be something where it always goes through insurance. So we don't need to abolish insurance. We just need to make it work like actual insurance. As for Medicare and TRICARE messing around with prices, it's a mess. And both of those programs, Medicare in particular, has just radically distorted the healthcare marketplace all throughout. And it needs really significant reform. But that is not that's just far beyond the scope of this conversation here today.
And that's not going to happen because of the shutdown either, right? Like they're not going to come out of
shutdown.
Like, hey, we solved the Medicare problem. I think the car analogy is really good. Just real quick on that for two more reasons too, right? Like, can you imagine how expensive gas would be if every time you went to the gas pump, the way it worked was instead of putting your credit card in the machine, you like filed a claim with somebody, and then that guy negotiated with the people
you
who
showed the gas attendant your car insurance
right,
card,
and
and
he had
he
to
was
go
like,
file a claim with the people who produce the gas, with the company that like extracts and produces the petroleum and trucks it here. And then those people negotiated how much of the cost the pump guy would pay, and how much you would pay, and how much the government would pay. And like a gallon of gas would be 10 times more expensive because you'd have to pay all those other intermediaries. And that's what we have in the health insurance system. And then the second part that makes that analogy really work, I think, Peter, is that again, going back to who these Affordable Care Act subsidies are benefiting. Like, can you imagine if we had a program that was going to pay for car insurance for people making six figures? Like, if that was a thing we were discussing, like, should the federal government subsidize your car insurance, family of four that earns $200,000 a year? Like, no, that's crazy. No, like, pay for your own car insurance. You want a big fancy 3-row SUV, you're going to pay more for it. Because that's the way the system works, because it's an insurance system set up the way an insurance system is supposed to work. And so once you take these discussions about healthcare and you take them out of the healthcare field and you put them in any other context, I think it becomes apparent just how ridiculous the conversations we have about healthcare policy often are, because it's like, yeah, of course we shouldn't be giving subsidies to people who are, well above the median household income in the country to pay for something that is essential that they should be able to budget themselves for.
Yeah. All right. Just to, sort of acknowledge the alternative argument here is healthcare is different. You can't predict when you're going to be very sick, right? And you also maybe can't make good decisions when you're right. You can't make good decisions if you're on a gurney, on a stretcher, right? You got to you need to have some mechanism for that. But again, for those quite unusual, for those catastrophic, those serious things, that is what insurance is good for. And insurance, we should have some sort of health insurance system, just not the one that we have right now. And certainly not the one that we are going to get from the shutdown, no matter what happens. There is absolutely no way that we are going to get significant, major healthcare reform. What we might get, the very best possible outcome, I think, from a libertarian perspective here, is just that these Obamacare expanded subsidies are not renewed. And we go back to Obamacare as it was when it was first passed, the thing that Democrats said was absolutely essential to save all these lives, to bring the costs down and all of this, right? They called it the Affordable Care Act, and then it turned out, well, it wasn't affordable. That's government programs for you folks. Eric, anything you want to say here as we close out before we go? Just like what should we expect from this shutdown? Is there maybe the question I want to ask you is there anything good that might come out of this shutdown? What's your most hopeful vision for this?
I guess just that it gets over relatively soon, and we can actually get to the
good thing that'll come out of the shutdown is it'll end.
Yeah. That's not a very libertarian point. I realize that, but I really do think the thing that Congress needs to negotiate an actual budget deal of some sort. And that's not going to happen with a 7-week continuing resolution either. So that, I'm not going to get what I want out of this. Yeah, I mean, it sucks a lot of oxygen out of the room for discussions about more important policies that we should be having. And I guess it's also, I had this in my notes to mention, I don't remember exactly why I typed this in here last night, but to mention Crisis and Leviathan, because I think that's kind of that's what these shutdowns are, right? It's the ratchet effect. It's the, as he puts it in that book, it's the old trick of turning every contingency into a resource for accumulating force. That's what we see whenever you have these kinds of crises, whether they're actual shutdowns or whether they're just threatened shutdowns. It's not that's never going to be the way we get to a smaller state or a more affordable government, or it's not going to be the way we address the national debt. Those are the things that need to happen, and Congress needs to do those things. And I just don't see the will for that to happen right now. But, I don't know. I guess I remain ever hopeful.
One possible ending here is that we end up with a continuing resolution, which is what Republicans have been proposing, but not the 7-week version. Instead, we end up with a 2 or a 3-week version that has already been floated. It's already been reported as of this afternoon. And so I definitely think that things could get stupider, and we could be doing this once again. Can we extend
the Affordable
2 or 3 weeks
on a 2-week basis too? We'll just do a temporary extension.
It's gonna be all governments is running on 2 weeks of funding for the rest of our lives. All right. I think it's a good note to go out on. Let's shut down this podcast. Eric Boehm, thank you so much. If you like this podcast, you should check out the Reason Roundtable. Runs every Monday or Tuesday morning on YouTube with me, Catherine Mengue-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and Matt Welch. We take on news and culture of the day from a libertarian perspective. It's a good podcast, folks. Eric, everybody who tuned in, thank you so much. This has been a special live shutdown edition of the Reason Roundtable.